For now, to take the conversation further, we're also going to bring Professor of African Politics and International Relations in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria, Professor Chris Isike. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to you, Lisa, and your viewers.
Right, so Prof, we're obviously looking at what has transpired in Niger, perhaps in Mali, further south, Mozambique. We're also seeing the Sahel region and Sudan at large. And so the issue of peace and security on the African continent and conflicts within those countries are coming to the fore. I wonder what you're observing on that front as we put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Well, all of these places you've mentioned in the continent, these are reflections of, the challenge of the state, the failure, the weakness of the state, and its inability to meet its obligations to its people, especially in terms of poverty and inequality that is growing. But in the case of the Sahel region, I think apart from corruption, which has been a major problem in the Niger Republic, for example, and much of the Sahel region, the problem of insecurity that stems from the inability of the state to govern well and to deliver on democratic dividends and deliver on development, for the peoples of these regions. And so many people have lost confidence in the area of the state in Africa, which has failed to be developmental in its approach and manifestation.
Because there's also been resolutions undertaken by the UN Security Council. Perhaps from theory, how that gets instituted, though, is obviously also coming to the fore. And some are questioning whether there needs to be a relaunch of the security operations in light of the various challenges that you alluded to on the continent. How would you weigh in on that?
Well, yes, it's always good to talk about, renewing the security sector, talk about security sector reform, the security architecture, peace and security architecture. All of these things are they do not address the fundamental problem of the weakness of the state, of the failure of the state, both in its essence and how it delivers on what it's supposed to be. So I think before we talk about rethinking security, we should rethink the idea of the state. What is the state supposed to be? What is it for? And what kind of governance notions should accompany a developmental state, which is what we should be having in the continent. In the absence of addressing that fundamental problem, these other security arrangements they may help here and there, but they will not solve the problem fundamentally. Let's not forget that the West, for example, the United States, even France, have put in a lot of money in Niger to try and address the insecurity there. But has it prevented the military from doing what they have done now to seize power and say there's been misgovernance, there's been corruption? It hasn't stopped it. And of course, there's a difference between what we see in Niger and what we saw last year and 2 years ago in Burkina Faso, last year in Guinea and in Mali, where the citizens of these countries came out to embrace these military interventions. In the case of Niger, we've seen quietness, and in fact, we've seen supporters of the president, Bazoum, coming out to protest until they were shelled out to quietness. So there's a bit of difference here, but the question of the state and the role that the people should be playing in forming the state and making that state legitimate, both in their eyes and in the eyes of everyone else.
Well, Prof, you make pertinent points there because of the political and security upheavals in some of the countries. Now, as we look at Niger, it's obviously impacting the so-called democratic gains at this point. You've also spoken about how both the US or Western allies, even France for that matter, have military bases to protect the uranium-rich country of Niger. They've also come out to condemn the coup, the United Nations, echoing sentiments. We're questioning the response from the AU as well at this point. But in lieu of these developments, what do you think Russia's influence to a peaceful, secure Africa could also be at this point?
Well, this is one of the things that African leaders who are currently meeting in St. Petersburg in Russia, the Russia-Africa summit, should really put on the table the idea of having, if we are to have, security arrangements with Russia, for example, it should be with the Russian state, not with private entities or militias like the Wagner Group that have, caused a lot of havoc in the continent. And when we begin to look deeply into this particular crisis now in Niger, you will see that it is not unconnected with the Wagner Group, looking at what they've done in Mali and the role that they have played in terms of human rights abuses and trying to create a sphere of influence. Let's also not forget that President Bazoum is also being caricatured as a liberal who is more Western oriented than anything else. When you look at his policies on gender equality, making opportunities for the girl child in a Muslim country to access education equally with the boy child, these are policies that could be interpreted by some as liberal. And then, of course, his romance with the United States have enabled groups like the Wagner groups and other insurgents within that region, to try and use that as a reason to take over power. But all of it still go back to the question of the state. How weak or how strong is the state? And I'm not talking about hard power strength or soft power strength, but I'm talking about legitimacy of the state.
Yes.
And a role that people can play in making it clear to military leaders that the era of the military is over. I mean, Niger has had 4 military coups. This is probably the 5th military coup since 1960. The military have dominated the governance of that country. What have they done? Have they done any better than the government that they are criticizing today? The answer is no. So is military to take over the solution?
No, a pertinent points there, because on the issue of the Russia summit, Africa summit that is underway, just very quickly, I wonder, with all the heads of state converging, can African states at this point work together to get favorable outcomes in favor of the continent at large? I really want to look at the significance of what is set to transpire there and the efficacy of it.
Well, look, if they can articulate and pursue a common position for the continent, yes, they can achieve something. They have not been able to do so. We don't have a common position on how to deal with superpowers, whether it's Russia, United States, or China. We're always at the receiving end of whatever largesse that these people give. And of course, these are always aligned to their interests. So we do not have a common African position on what we want from some of these superpowers that are now, fighting themselves, competing amongst themselves to get a foothold in Africa. Africa needs to take advantage of this, and the starting point is for us to have, what I call, a cooperative hegemony, or a group hegemonic leadership of different regional powers that can come together, articulate a common African position, and represent the continent, in these discussions and negotiations. Otherwise, at the end of the day, because there are small countries like Niger, like Mali, like Malawi, these countries will just be cherry-picked by these powers, and oftentimes they knock us against one another, and this is what we've been busy doing.
Prof, thank you for your time with us on the SABC. For those sentiments, Professor Chris Isike really just unpacking the peace and security situation on the continent, perhaps as we take a look at the developments in Niger and how that's going to impact the region and the continent.